the price of gas has shot up.
Explains the value of real estate is soaring faster than people's income.
Inflation is a real challenge to American families.
And its gas prices top $5 on average nationwide.
In May, inflation hit 8.6%.
You didn't fall behind. That's the first lie you were taught to believe. You didn't make the wrong choices. You didn't fail to work hard enough. You didn't miss some secret opportunity everyone else found. You did exactly what you were told. You went to school. You got the degree. You took the job. You showed up on time. You stayed loyal. You saved when you could. You played by the rules. And while you were climbing, the ladder was quietly pulled upward, not snapped in half, not destroyed overnight, just raised high enough that you could never quite reach the next rung. That's what this story is really about. What was promised was stability, ownership, dignity, a life where work led somewhere. What was taken was security, purchasing power, time, the future you were told to plan for. And while you were told this was bad luck, bad timing, or bad personal decisions, the truth is far simpler and far more disturbing. The middle class didn't disappear. It was dismantled. Slowly, deliberately, profitably, because a stable middle class is expensive and dependence is far more efficient. There was a time when the middle class actually worked, not as a myth, not as nostalgia, as a structure. One income could support a household. Housing costs were proportional to wages. Healthcare existed without financial ruin. Retirement wasn't a fantasy. Work didn't make you rich, but it made you safe, and safety was the point. The middle class wasn't about luxury. It was about predictability. If you worked full-time, you could expect a baseline life, a home, a car, a family, time off, a future that didn't feel fragile. That arrangement wasn't charity. It wasn't generosity. It was a bargain. Workers traded labor and loyalty. Companies traded wages and stability. Governments enforced the structure. And for a few decades, the system held. Then something changed. Not all at once. Not with one headline. Not with one villain. It changed the way most real things change. Quietly. By incentives. The economy got more efficient. Technology made work faster. Global supply chains made production cheaper. Finance made everything measurable. And shareholder value stopped being one priority among many and became the priority. It's hard to explain how much that phrase rewired reality. Because once a company's main job becomes maximize quarterly returns, everything else becomes optional. Training becomes optional. Loyalty becomes optional. Benefits become optional. Long-term thinking becomes optional. Even the idea of keeping people stable becomes optional. And that's where the middle class started bleeding out, not from one cut, from 1,000 paper cuts that all pointed in the same direction. Productivity exploded. Output climbed. Companies produced more with fewer people. But wages stopped moving, not because people got lazy, not because the economy had no growth, not because times are tough, because the leverage shifted. When workers have leverage, rising productivity becomes higher pay. When workers don't, rising productivity becomes higher profit. And for decades, the story of the American middle class has been one long shift in leverage. First, job security began to thin out. The promise used to be simple. You give the company your best years, and the company gives you stability. Not glamour. Stability. A predictable schedule, a predictable path, a predictable life. Then stability became nice to have. Layoffs became a tool. Outsourcing became normal. Temp work became normal. Contract work became normal. Flexible schedules became normal. And in a strange twist, the burden of flexibility always landed on the person with less power. Then benefits started to vanish. The old middle class was built on benefits as much as wages. Health insurance that didn't bankrupt you. Pensions that didn't require you to be a day trader. Paid time off that wasn't treated like a personal weakness. Those didn't vanish overnight. They were redesigned, shifted, rebranded. A pension became a 401k. A guarantee became a responsibility. A shared risk became your problem. And at first it sounded modern. It sounded empowering. It sounded like progress, until you realized what it really meant. It meant the company got to keep the upside when things went well, and you got stuck holding the downside when things went wrong. Risk didn't disappear. It moved downward, onto households, onto people who couldn't absorb it, onto individuals who were told to manage forces they were never meant to control. And if you're wondering why this matters, here's why. A stable person negotiates. A stable person walks away. A stable person demands more. A stable person can strike. A fragile person doesn't. A fragile person stays quiet. A fragile person smiles and takes it. A fragile person accepts the new normal because the alternative is collapse. Fragility is profitable. That's the part no one likes to say out loud. To understand how deliberate this was, you have to zoom out for a second, because the middle class didn't naturally shrink. It was squeezed by a series of choices that all pointed the same way. When workers had bargaining power, companies had to share. That power came from unions, from tight labor markets, from regulations that limited how hard capital could lean on labor. And as that power weakened, the squeeze began. Factories didn't just move overseas, they were moved. Trade policy, corporate strategy, and cost-cutting incentives made it inevitable. The message to workers became implicit but brutal. If you ask for more, we'll find someone cheaper. At the same time, the tax and corporate world evolved around one idea. Wealth is more valuable when it compounds at the top. So more profits were redirected into buybacks. More compensation shifted into stock. More corporate strategy became keep the price up. Not make the product better. Not take care of the workforce. Keep the price up. That's how you get an economy where customer service collapses, products get worse, and everyone still reports record earnings. Because the goal isn't excellence, it's extraction. And while all of this was happening, another cost center started swelling like a tumor. Healthcare. It used to be a benefit you barely thought about. Then it became a negotiation point. Then it became a monthly payment. Then it became a second rent. Then it became a gamble. Healthcare costs didn't just rise. They became a permanent anxiety tax, a background fear that you can be doing fine and still be one diagnosis away from financial damage. And notice how that interacts with leverage. A person who is afraid of losing healthcare stays employed. A person who is afraid of losing healthcare doesn't strike. A person who is afraid of losing healthcare tolerates abuse. That fear isn't a side effect, it's a stabilizer for the system. Same with childcare, same with housing, same with student debt. Each one functions like a weight that keeps you from moving freely. And then the labor market itself changed. Careers used to be ladders inside companies. Now they're obstacle courses between companies. You don't build seniority the way you used to. You reapply for your own life every few years. You negotiate like a freelancer, even if you're a full-time employee. And every time you switch, you absorb risk. New probation periods, new benefit clocks, new uncertainty. That's not because stability is impossible. It's because stability isn't the priority. Stability is expensive. A stable middle class demands higher pay, stronger protections, and slower extraction. It demands that companies leave money on the table. It demands long-term thinking. It demands restraint. And restraint is not competitive in an economy that rewards short-term returns. So the system selected for the opposite. It selected for fragility, for dependence, for people who keep showing up no matter what, because they can't afford not to. That's why so many people feel like their lives are fine, but never safe. Fine is not the goal. Functional is the goal. Functional workers keep the machine moving. Functional consumers keep spending. Functional households keep paying. And functional people don't revolt. That's why the dismantling didn't need secret meetings. It didn't need a master plan on paper. It only needed incentives that rewarded the same outcome over and over across decades. And those incentives did exactly what incentives always do. They built a world where the middle class becomes a memory people argue about, while the new reality becomes the air you breathe. Then came the second shift, the replacement of pay with debt, because the system had a problem. If wages stall too long, the consumer economy slows down. And if the consumer economy slows down, corporate growth slows down. And if corporate growth slows down, markets panic. So the system reached for the cleanest solution it could find. Credit. Debt became the replacement for income growth. Instead of higher wages, you got loans. Instead of secure housing costs, you got bigger mortgages. Instead of affordable education, you got student debt. Instead of healthcare that made sense, you got deductibles and payment plans. Instead of breathing room, you got monthly obligations. Debt didn't raise living standards. It disguised the collapse of living standards. It let people keep the appearance of progress. You could still buy the house. You just needed more years of payments. You could still go to college. You just needed decades to pay it off. You could still keep up. You just needed to owe someone forever. This is where the middle class quietly changed from a floor into a performance. You weren't stable, you were balancing, and balancing feels like living until one gust of wind hits, one layoff, one injury, one divorce, one rent jump, one interest rate spike, one parent who needs help, one child with a medical bill that doesn't care what your budget says. And suddenly you realize something horrifying. The system didn't build you a life, it built you a tightrope. Now add the third shift, housing. There was a time when a home was primarily shelter, a place to live, a place to raise kids, a place to feel rooted. And yes, it was also an investment, but it was an investment in the old way. Slow, boring, a hedge against time. Then homes became something else. They became financial products. They were no longer priced by local incomes. They were priced by demand that wasn't local at all. Demand from investors, from institutions, from capital that didn't need a place to sleep, only a place to park money and extract yield. Shelter became an asset, an investment vehicle, a hedge against inflation, a revenue stream. And when shelter becomes a revenue stream, the incentives flip. A family wants a stable payment and a stable neighborhood. An investor wants maximum rent and maximum appreciation. Those goals are not compatible. And the moment investors entered at scale, families stopped competing with families. They started competing with spreadsheets. That's why bidding wars became normal. That's why cash offer became a weapon. That's why starter homes disappeared. That's why rents rose like they were chasing something. Because they were. They were chasing returns. This is the moment the ladder started getting pulled up. Not metaphorically, literally. Down payments grew faster than savings. Monthly payments grew faster than wages. And when people couldn't buy, they rented. And when they rented, rent rose. And when rent rose, they couldn't save. And when they couldn't save, they couldn't buy. A loop, a trap. And through the whole thing, the story you heard was the same. It's your fault. You bought coffee. You chose the wrong city. You didn't hustle enough. You didn't sacrifice enough. But budgeting can't outrun structural math. You can't outdiscipline a system where prices permanently outpace income. And the reason the blame narrative is so powerful is because it keeps the pressure inward. If you think you're the problem, you don't question the structure. You just grind harder inside it. You take on more, work more, sacrifice more, become smaller, and a population that becomes smaller is easier to manage. Then 2008 happened. And this is where the story turns from quiet dismantling into public exposure. Because 2008 didn't create the middle-class crisis. It revealed it. It made the fragility obvious. Millions lost their homes. Not because they stopped working, because the system was built on leverage, and leverage breaks. Retirement accounts evaporated, wages collapsed, jobs vanished, and the response told you everything you needed to know. Institutions would be saved. Households would be disciplined. That's the rule. It's been the rule for a long time, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. When capital is threatened, the system moves fast. When labor is threatened, the system moves slow. Banks got rescued, people got lectures. The recovery came, but it didn't come evenly. Asset prices recovered faster than wages. The stock market healed faster than communities. Home prices snapped back faster than families could rebuild. In other words, the recovery happened. It just happened upward. And this is where the ladder got pulled higher. Because people who already owned assets, stocks, homes, businesses, rode the recovery like a rocket. People who didn't own assets watched the cost of entry move further away. And if you were young during that window, the timing was brutal. You graduated into a weak job market. You took whatever you could get. You delayed milestones. You delayed buying. You delayed stability. And that delay created a vacuum that capital happily filled. Then COVID hit. And COVID didn't change the direction of the story, it accelerated it. It poured gasoline on every existing trend. Assets surged, housing exploded, corporate consolidation accelerated. Small businesses got crushed, remote work reshuffled demand, supply chains broke, prices rose. And once again, the outcome looked like a contradiction. People struggled, markets soared, workers were called essential, then treated as replaceable. Companies posted record profits, wages rose in pockets, then got eaten alive by costs. And the people who already owned assets got richer. The people who didn't got locked out. This is the moment most people started to feel something they couldn't quite name. Not just stress, not just inflation, not just anxiety. A kind of exhaustion that felt personal. Like you were doing everything you were told, and still falling behind. Like adulthood was harder than it was supposed to be. Like the basic milestones were becoming luxury items, like you were carrying a backpack that got heavier every year. And the worst part? You looked around and saw everyone else pretending it was normal. Because the system doesn't announce the replacement. It normalizes it. It turns structural collapse into a personality issue. It turns economics into a morality tale. It turns a missing ladder into you didn't climb hard enough. And that's why this story matters. Because if you don't understand what happened, you'll spend your life blaming yourself for a problem you didn't create. That's how the middle class died. Not with a crash, with a slow, quiet shift in incentives that turned stability into extraction. And by the time most people noticed, they weren't just behind. They were tired. That's when something deeper broke. Time. The middle class used to buy time. Time to rest. Time to recover. Time to raise children. Time to build something slowly. Time to make mistakes without losing everything. That time disappeared quietly. Two incomes stopped being an advantage and became the minimum. Side hustles stopped being ambition and became survival. Burnout stopped being a warning sign and became a personality trait. Work followed people home. Emails replaced evenings. Weekends became recovery periods instead of rest. Vacations turned into logistical stress instead of renewal. And still, it wasn't enough. Every year, the cost of existing rose. Housing rose, healthcare rose, education rose, childcare rose, insurance rose, transportation rose. Everything that made life stable became more expensive. At the same time, wages stayed pinned to the floor. And here's the part most people never hear explained clearly. This wasn't chaos, it was alignment. Corporations benefited from lower labor costs. Asset owners benefited from appreciation. Financial institutions benefited from debt. Governments benefited from consumption continuing without wage reform. No secret meeting was required. No master plan had to be written down. The incentives all pointed in the same direction. And systems follow incentives. A middle class with stability is expensive. It demands higher wages. It demands protections. It demands long-term thinking. It demands restraint. Restraint is inefficient. Dependence, on the other hand, scales beautifully. A workforce with debt doesn't strike easily, doesn't walk away easily, doesn't demand more easily. A population that rents instead of owns stays mobile, replaceable, flexible. From the system's perspective, that isn't failure. That's optimization. And belief is what kept it alive. Belief that promotions would come. Belief that raises would catch up. Belief that loyalty still mattered. Belief that hard work would eventually pay off. Belief that this was temporary. Belief mattered more than wages, because as long as people believed the middle class still existed, they would keep chasing it, and chasing keeps systems running. The most dangerous moment for any system like this isn't when people suffer. It's when they understand why. Because suffering without understanding produces compliance. Understanding produces withdrawal. And that's when the replacement becomes visible. The middle class didn't collapse. It was replaced. Replaced by a permanent working class that rents instead of owns, that borrows instead of accumulates, that works continuously instead of progressing, that survives month to month instead of building decades, a class that stays functional but fragile, productive but exposed, busy but never secure. Once you accept that reality, something important happens. The confusion lifts. Because the most damaging thing the system ever did wasn't take your money. It took your sense of direction. It convinced people to chase a life that no longer existed by the rules they were given. That's why so many people feel exhausted without knowing why. Why effort no longer maps cleanly to outcome. Why adulthood feels heavier than it's supposed to. Why doing everything right still feels like falling behind. The map is outdated. So what do you do when the destination no longer exists? You stop walking toward it. You stop trying to win a game whose rules were rewritten while you were playing. And this is where people split into two groups, those who panic and those who adapt. Adaptation doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't look like rebellion. It doesn't look like rage or escape fantasies. It looks like clarity, survival, and success now comes from alignment. Not alignment with institutions, alignment with reality. You stop optimizing for comfort and start optimizing for leverage. Leverage means being harder to trap. It means skills that travel, skills that work across companies, industries, and cycles. Skills that don't disappear when one employer changes priorities. It means income that isn't tied to a single gatekeeper, because single points of failure are how people get stuck. It means flexibility instead of prestige, mobility instead of permanence, optionality instead of appearances. You stop treating fixed costs as normal, because fixed costs are how people get locked into fragile lives. A mortgage you can't walk away from, a car payment that assumes stable income forever, a lifestyle built around obligations instead of choice. You build your life so that no is survivable. You treat debt like what it actually is, a leash, not a neutral tool, not a stepping stone, a leash that tightens when conditions change. You keep burn rates low enough to move, low enough to pivot, low enough to say no when something stops making sense. You value liquidity over aesthetics, control over comfort, freedom over validation. And one of the most important shifts of all, you stop anchoring your identity to institutions. Companies are tools, banks are tools, systems are tools. They are not guardians. They don't exist to protect you. They exist to optimize outcomes for themselves. Once you accept that, you stop feeling betrayed every time they act accordingly. And most importantly, you stop blaming yourself, because shame is the lubricant of this entire system. If you believe failure is personal, you keep grinding inside broken rules. You internalize outcomes you never controlled. You exhaust yourself trying to earn a reward that no longer exists. If you understand failure is structural, you start playing differently. That's the quiet power of clarity. Not anger, not bitterness. Clarity. The system doesn't need a strong middle class. It needs just enough people functioning to keep consumption flowing and unrest contained. Just enough stability to prevent revolt. Just enough hope to keep people working. The rest is optional. That's why nothing ever truly fixes this. Crashes don't reset it. Elections don't reverse it. Booms don't repair it. Because the incentives remain aligned. Assets are protected. Capital compounds. Labor absorbs shocks. That isn't a glitch. That's the design. And once you see that, the final shift happens. You stop measuring success by milestones designed for a different era. You stop asking why you're behind. You stop comparing yourself to narratives that no longer apply. You start asking better questions. Where is the pressure coming from? What assumptions am I still carrying that don't serve me? What obligations limit my ability to move? What skills give me leverage instead of dependence? The middle class didn't disappear. It was replaced, and you were never meant to understand why. Because understanding changes behavior. It changes participation. It changes compliance. Now you do. And that understanding doesn't trap you. It frees you from chasing a life that no longer exists. The system doesn't need you to succeed. It only needs you to keep believing. And now, you don't. For more insights like this, like and subscribe.